Bitcoin was down 85% from the high. And as an old-time macro guy, you're looking to buy things that have gone down 85, 90% after a blow-off. That's what it is. Yeah. I think it's a security truth machine. Okay, well, Amazon, that's worth $1 trillion. It sells stuff on the internet. But is that as valuable as a new invention for humanity?
One of my key ideas is that within this recession scenario that I think is building, that gold and Bitcoin are going to be two of the assets that perform extremely well because they become options on a more extreme monetary policy. So I wanted to speak to one person who brings both of those themes together. He happens to be one of the most experienced macro people in the entire world. He's touched and worked with a lot of the greats of the industry, and he has a unique perspective. And he's been hassling me and hounding me for about 6 months now that I need to get back involved in Bitcoin. And when Dan, who's not a Bitcoin guy originally, starts doing that to me, he's got a reason, because he's a pure macro player. So I really want to hear what he's thinking here and how this fits into my broader narrative. Dan, finally we get you back. Your kind of previous videos were kind of cult watching for a lot of people because you're one of the pure macro guys. And I was doing this whole thought process about recession and bits and pieces. And I've been thinking that Bitcoin was part of what I'm looking at within that framework. And you and I separately have been talking about it. And you'd been kind of hounding me from about February onwards to say, Conrad, you've got to get back into this. Before we get into your thought process and how you've kind of applied your own macro framework into building your Bitcoin thesis, it's just people should, because many people won't have seen you from the earlier interviews, just to go back over some of your background. And the reason that I like to pick your brains and stuff is you have a background almost unparalleled from anybody I know. I mean, you've worked with the greats of the industry, whether it was Julian Robertson at Tiger, whether it was Stan Druckenmiller, whether it was Steinhardt, whether it was Jacob Rothschild, whether it was Stevie Cohen. I mean, the list is kind of endless. And you get all their perspectives from working and seeing how they all trade. You're also a bit of an entrepreneur. I mean, you started a gold business, which was a crazy idea when you started it. But now, it's a really interesting Gold Bullion International. GBI is a really interesting business. You even started, I think, the largest farming real estate business in the world with Stan Druckenmiller and managed to punt it onto the Canadian pension system. I think it's now resold to Bill Gates, I think it is. Your perspective is just kind of extraordinary. And I know, and that's why I trust you. You're a macro guy through and through. You live and breathe this stuff. And when you start hounding me by email every day almost saying, Raoul, you've got Bitcoin. Okay, what the fuck's going on?
Yeah. Well, thanks for that intro. Yeah, I know we haven't over the years talked that much about Bitcoin.
No.
You're one of the guys who back in 13, 14, I think, put it on the map, at least for the macro community. I mean, you were very bullish very early. And I was also involved early through GBI. We had, in 2014, integrated with the Uphold platform, which allowed clients to buy and sell Ripple and Bitcoin to buy and sell physical gold as well as other metals. And so that was a whole year-long integration. And going through that process, I realized, wow, this is something. It could be big, or the company is going to make revenues. And unfortunately, what happened was that it started well, but it never really became a big revenue driver. I can't say why exactly, but the physical gold company then also moved into other areas, I guess, within crypto. And even today, I think we just launched, I think it's there are only two places where one can buy Bitcoin in one's IRA, and we partnered with Equity Trust.
Wow.
And now through Equity Trust, you have the ability to buy actually more than just Bitcoin, but some of the other crypto as well. So, it's been part of our DNA a little bit, GBI, and so through that, and through, of course, your writing, and also, the guys, there are other macro guys of my vintage who moved
You
into
introduced me
crypto.
to Dan
I know.
Moorhead, right?
And Dan Moorhead, and there's Nova Gratz and John Burbank, and so sort of the smartest guys, the best guys my age, all moved into crypto, and so there's something going on, and I did my reading, I did my work, but I never really quite committed to the concept, and I think that so I was dancing around it, but I never did the deep dive that would give me the confidence. And then in 17, of course, you see it running, but at 2,000 or 3,000, you decided to, sell your position. So I'm thinking, there's no way I can buy here.
Because you were at that round table when we started getting feedback from the guys who were very early adopters.
Oh yeah.
From Chad,
Yeah.
from Emil, sorry.
Yes, that's
that
right.
He's like, we need to be a little bit cautious here.
Right.
Rocket it.
Right. So I missed it, and that's fair. But earlier in the year, February, March, as you had said, Bitcoin was down 85% from the high, and as an old-time macro guy, you're looking to buy things that have gone down 85-90% after a blow-off. And it's binary then. Either it's a bankruptcy or a fraud, or that's the bottom. And so I said, okay, here's a chance. I don't think it's a fraud. I'm going to buy some. And so that started a process of deep digging and research. And I probably in that period, and that was when I was shooting you because I needed some confirmation.
I can't focus on this. I'm looking at the recession coming up. You're like, Bitcoin.
Right, and I understood that, and I'm sort of with you on that. But that started a process. I probably spent 400 to 500 hours reading, listening to podcasts. There's some really excellent work out there now available. That wasn't 5 years ago, in terms of explaining, what is Bitcoin? What is this, phenomena? What is it? And, what I come to see is that almost every person has a slightly different definition for what Bitcoin is. And I think that that's contributed to making it very difficult to adopt easily. And so what do I mean by that? So I thought, okay, let's get down to the very essence of this. Yes, I understand digital payments, store of value, I'm reading all this stuff. But what Bitcoin really is that white paper. And you go back and you read this thing, and I don't understand even half of it. But what you realize is that this is a great invention. It's not a coin. It's a system, right? It's not, a blockchain, and and maybe it's an invention akin to, the motor engine or the invention of electricity. It's something, potentially a new organizing principle for humanity. And part of the problem was that people, when they start really digging into Bitcoin, they end up saying these kinds of things, which, really puts everyone off because you're thinking, well, this is a, madman changing the world, all of this stuff. But, so as a macro guy, I come at it, macro investor, I'm thinking, well, what's the value of it? What's it worth? The difficulty I always had was trying to put a value on it. I need to know what I think it's worth today and what I think it'll be worth in 3, 4, 5 years, and have a proper, proper framework. Mm-hmm. And I found that very difficult, in 14, even, listening to some of our contemporaries talk about it. I just didn't quite get it. It's because Bitcoin is a lot of things. So what it is it's an invention. And I think it should be referred to as an invention rather than all the other things. It's what it really is it's a truth machine. It's a way, in a way, to eradicate all fraud or, lying by human beings. I mean, the whole bigger concept of certainty, of confirmation, of validity, of security. That's what you're buying, a system that, now is 10 years old, has a tremendous track record. And I'm thinking, well, what's that worth? What is a security platform like that, with that track record? What is that? What's the value of that? And I think back in the early days, it was very hard to get a sense. You have something that has a $3 billion market cap. Who cares from my perspective? It would have been great to have bought it at $10 or $50, but I think that really was the realm of the VC. I never would have had that kind of vision, the Tim Draper early vision. It was just, I remember going down to Barry's office, Silbert, in 2013, 14, and he says, oh, Dan, we have this product and we're trading, like $2 million a day. And I thought, $2 million a day, I mean, that's not anything. It's not a store of value. It's not anything. So that's just from my perspective. And again, just given where I was coming from, would have been hard to really grasp, to be all in. White paper, it just all was completely different, a new language. And also you had the fraud component and Mt. Gox and all of this, and really in the first 5 years.
Yeah.
So that kept away, I would say, traditional macro people, but also just people in general. I think that kept people away from it and said, oh, I don't have to bother with it. But for me, it was, I don't really understand how to value it. So here I am, I'm going back in the beginning part of this year, and I'm thinking, okay, it's gone down 85, 90%. I know it's real. How do I value it? What's this security truth machine worth, right? So
Security truth machine.
that's what it is.
Yeah.
I think it's a security truth machine. And the Bitcoin really is just the reward that the miners get for guaranteeing the security of the framework, of the network. That's what it is. Now, if you think about what would it cost for a company to build that? If that belonged to one person, it's hundreds of billions of dollars. Think about all the man-hours. Think about all the people who have volunteered their time. What is that worth, all of that time?
That's a really interesting thing, because you and I know the sheer amount of intellectual capital, programming capital, the amount of people working on this space is unbelievable. I've never seen anything like it.
Yeah, I think and I'm really just sticking to Bitcoin for the
But
moment.
even within Bitcoin, the amount of development
Yeah.
and intellectual capital that's involved is huge.
Yeah, over these years, like what would it cost to build that? It's truly a massive endeavor, something that can touch every single human being on the planet. All they need is a phone. It's kind of an incredible, could a company even develop that? Or maybe Satoshi realized it could only be developed slowly over time in a decentralized way, because the current, the structure of the way a corporation works could never work fast enough. This thing is going 24/7. Not just the trading of it, but the maintaining of the system and all the mining that's going on. It's constant. Part of the problem, I think, in the early days is that it's hard to really believe as an investor that someone invented something unique and gave it to the world for free. And so it was valued at zero in the beginning. If it had been within a normal company structure, it would have grown to some degree, and you would have had an IPO, and maybe it would have been worth more than WeWork, which is 50 billion, or I don't even know how you compare it. But I'm just saying that I think it took a while to adopt, because it didn't make sense that if you had done this early digging and you had realized the nature of the invention early, to think that this could be worth trillions of dollars, it was too far, I think, a stretch. Yeah. Not for the VC people, maybe, not for the private equity people, not for the technologists, I think, who got in earlier, and then maybe not for the smart macro guys who we've mentioned who are actually also in. You can get to numbers very reasonably that are, the Winklevoss number is a million on Bitcoin, and Draper is 250,000. Within 5 to 8 years, there's, you can start to see it because you say, okay, well, Amazon, that's worth $1 trillion. It sells stuff on the internet. But is that as valuable as a new invention for humanity? And that is applicable to almost everything we do.
But most people don't see that. Can you talk a bit about
right?
that?
So I think
because they just think most people are still stuck with, well, somebody's created something that they claim has value, and
right.
There's a lot of the naysayers would say that. But you're saying something so huge.
Yeah.
Explain a bit about the hugeness.
Yeah, I think, and this is part of the problem and the hurdle for Bitcoin is that it takes so much work and so much digging. I mean, of every piece I've read, I probably only understand, in the beginning, 30% and 50%, and then, maybe 70%. I still can't understand the details of the white paper. However, I've spoken with people, in one case a founder of PayPal, in another case a genius cryptographer, and they all say that it's genius. And so what's behind the genius? He solved the Byzantine generals problem. And so that problem had not been solved ever. People have been trying to solve
Explain
that
problem.
So that's the problem of trust, not having a central authority verify a communication between you and I. So having a third party that we both trust verify our interaction.
Yeah.
Okay, so it was very difficult to figure out a mechanism to build a solution to that problem with a real world application. And so what's something worth? Again, the macro guy, what's something worth that solves a problem that they haven't been able to solve for hundreds of years? And the reason is that it's so multidisciplinary. It's financial, it involves cryptography and computer science and sociology and psychology and economics. And, to be honest, I don't think Bitcoin would have been invented without '08, because in '08, the trust was lost, okay? The banks basically failed and they were saved. And there were people who were saved that shouldn't have been saved. Now, my response to that crisis was, okay, unfortunately backward looking, being a historian myself, I'm going to create a gold company, physical gold company, where that stores gold outside the banking system, that is fully allocated, where you have your name on it. And in a way, that was my
that was your macro bet.
Right. That was my solution to
a broken system.
Right. I need a way. I want to have some allocation to that because I'm concerned about that. I mean, I'm not in the realm of the technical genius to solve a math problem that hasn't been solved for hundreds of years, to turn that into a functioning system with incentives. I mean, that's part of this.
It's like behavioral economics is all rolled into this.
That's right. So how do you get someone to maintain the integrity of the system? How do you get millions of people and millions of bits of energy? I mean, using all of this energy, how do you convince someone or a decentralized group to say, hey, we're all going to work towards the security of this new platform? Right? How do you come up with that? Well, there's real math behind that. And so this is a mathematical solution to the trust problem created by '08. So, right? And so again, GBI, my company, I figured in Occ '08, I had the idea, and we launched in March '09. The white paper came out in March '09. And then had a very, unfortunately, it was way over my head. But of course, that was the right macro response to the crisis, which also makes me think that Satoshi had a very advanced sense of the macro, because it was only our crowd that talked a lot about fiat. fiat currency and gold and, debasing of the currency through quantitative easing and negative interest rates. Well, of course, so we all thought, oh yeah, gold, right? But for someone to have understood sort of that deep macro problem, as well as all of the computer science and cryptographic aspects, I mean, that does not exist in any person who I knew. I mean, so now all of a sudden you hear every Tom, Dick, and Harry on Bitcoin, on Twitter, Bitcoin talking about, fiat this, and I don't want my fiat that. And, it's 10 years later, but it used to really just belong in the realm of the macro.
That's
so
right.
It's really a phenomenal person or a group of people who brought all of these pieces together. And so Bitcoin people are like, well, okay, Dan, that's obvious. We knew that 10 years ago. You're not saying anything new to us. And I'm like, yes, I know. But for the macro community and for investors at large, institutional investors as well, and they're way behind, they need a language to understand what Bitcoin is. They need, it's so confusing when you listen to these different people, often there's a lot of hype. Even like, Antonopoulos, who's written his 2 books. I read the last one recently. It's a brilliant book, but you have to really go through it. You have to pull things out of it. You have to constantly be upgrading your knowledge because it's also evolving and there's constant innovation. But as I said, every person describes it differently.
It's because it's an entire system. It's an entire architecture, infrastructure, and system all combined. So it has attributes of many things.
Right. That's exactly
What
right.
is society? It's like asking philosophical questions. It's actually a philosophical question. What is Bitcoin?
That is right. That is right. And that's hard for people who are looking for cash flow or EBITDA or whatever it is to value. Macro guys value things all the time that have no cash flow. Gold is one. Bonds now certainly have negative cash flow.
Yeah.
I don't know who could buy bonds. But anyway, the point is that, this isn't just valuing something with no specific cash flow right now. But, in the future, there might be. I mean, it might be that at some point there's so many places that it could go, and I'm not the right guy to start throwing out the possibilities and all the use cases. I'm trying to think of, what is this platform worth? And I think eventually part of the value is that, it is, if it need be, traceable back to somebody somehow. And, we've seen this. We've seen with, the FBI, if they think that there's, some fraud or something, they can, not in all cases, but they can go back. Physical gold, it's more difficult. My only point is that gold, it's a hedge in the traditional system, for the traditional system. Stocks and most people who are long stocks and bonds, gold is a good hedge. And now with rates close to zero, if we go through this thing where U.S. 2 years are going back down to 2%, you don't have a real hedge. It's not clear to me that Bitcoin acts as that hedge. It can, but what I'm trying to say is that Bitcoin really is something much bigger than that. And to just, be comparing it or, gold and Bitcoin are cousins. They're both alternative
part
currencies.
Of Bitcoin, yeah.
Right. The value part, the part that trades on the screen, they're alternative currencies, right? That one little part of Bitcoin. Bitcoin really is massive. So I'm not sure why everyone is comparing, Bitcoin to digital gold. Maybe they think it's an easy way to, for people to understand it, but it's not an easy way. It confuses it. I think if it were presented as this invention of a new system, and if it were articulated in the right way, I think it would make adoption easier and quicker. And so this leads me to, think the greatest need in the Bitcoin community, again, from a macro guy perspective, not, someone who's involved, nitty gritty. The leaders in the area need to either come together. Is it Coin Center, which is the advocate in in D.C.
Right.
You know, maybe each of them have to put in $5 million into a pot, and they have to, develop a proper marketing and educational plan. And I think this is important in D.C. as well, because, this is something that the U.S. is going to be a huge growth mechanism. I think potentially could create a huge number of jobs. And right now, they're antagonistic people in the leadership. I think a lot of people, they haven't done all this work, and they're listening to these little bits of information from different people, and they have the wrong idea. And so an education marketing mechanism funded by, these guys are making a fortune now, I think is the way to build something that removes the general hostility from at least the politicians here and maybe some of the central bankers. Once they realize what it is, I think they should actually create tax incentives to get people to buy in somehow, whether it's buying a little Bitcoin, whether it's they could make, you remember Amazon for the first 15 years of its existence, there was no state tax. There was no state or local tax on purchases. It was a gift. The first $10,000 of Bitcoin purchases should be tax-free or something like that. Because this is as I said, it's a whole framework that is hard to understand. I think owning a little bit makes it easier. And look, I haven't even talked about all the tremendous work that's going on underneath and above Bitcoin. Underneath, I mean, Ethereum and all these other ICOs. There are tremendous projects. There are 100 exchanges. I mean, this ecosystem, as they like to call it, but I think it's sort of more of a macro system.
I think it's a whole parallel system, financial system and everything else. I just think it's a whole parallel system being built in front of our eyes, the one that we've all been asking for.
Correct.
There's a lot of people still too cynical to realize what is going on in front of everybody's eyes, which is Plan B is rapidly becoming Plan A.
Yeah, but I don't think it necessarily that they're cynical or necessarily that it's Plan B. It's the future.
Yes.
Meaning, and some people are resistant to the future, and others aren't. I mean, like take Tim Draper. He's a very smart guy. He was very successful before Bitcoin, and I almost think, he's so enthusiastic that it maybe puts people off.
He was on Real Vision, and the same thing.
But he's phenomenal.
He was too enthusiastic, and people were like, "Well, I don't know."
No, but I know, but he's phenomenal. He's right. It's just, getting the message across in an organized way would really help. And for me, I mean, I hear Tim Draper.
How do you do that with a decentralized system, right? It's decentralized by nature. So,
well, I think so. This is.
So maybe the interesting thing is this development that everybody's going off in different directions, and that in itself is creating the whole much larger than if everyone was organized in one particular way.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think that's better. I mean, I think that's, and that's the robustness of this platform, is that it is decentralized and that it can't be shut down by anyone in one jurisdiction. But look, I'm an American. We're here in America. I think it's a great country. And I would want us to take advantage of it.
Yeah.
Right. And I think we could be the leaders, easily be the leaders in it. And if the government got behind it a little bit in terms of, now I know this is like heresy for the Bitcoin crowd, but it would be nice for the average guy on the street, who's at 60% equity and 40% in bonds and has his savings all locked up in these things, to not just educate him, but really even incentivize him to expand his brain a little bit. Because that's the real difficulty, is that it takes a long time. Because there are all of these different businesses. Now, not just the ones that have, where there are tokens, but there are also all these private businesses, hundreds of private businesses that are doing different things within this world that are phenomenally interesting. And they don't all make money. They won't all survive. But, it's very robust. It really is robust. And I think anyone under the age really of 30 should be moving into this area. And I would say, and I don't think you really have to be a computer genius or a programmer. I think they need people, this I don't want to call it industry, but this area needs people who can bring things to market, who can, I think some of these small companies have brilliant ideas, but don't know their customer well enough. They're not, they need sales and marketing people. And I think you're going to have that come, from, maybe it's from some of the Deutsche Bank, type people. But I also think it's more creative people, not just people who are on a phone doing a transaction.
So when you look at the macro landscape and you see this, is this just kind of dwarfs everything else in macro opportunity land?
Yeah, so the thing is, you have to be careful with hyperbole because, the answer is yes. But if you start out with that, people think you're nuts.
Well,
and especially all the guys I work for, I think people over the age of 50, okay, or maybe even 40, 45, have a really hard time because we're also used to snatching up these little phrases from the Facebook or from Twitter or from a newspaper article, and very few people have digested the whole thing, and so you hear these phrases, digital gold, and then so someone who owns gold will say, oh, that's crazy, I'm never selling my gold for this thing that's up in the air, right? Like I don't know what that's crazy, but. I actually getting back to the gold thing for a second. I just think those are the people. They shouldn't be being attacked. Those are the people who are going to be the first adopters from the next group of people because they already understand the concept of debasing fiat and an alternative currency. The people who are long, those are your cousins. They shouldn't be attacking them. They should be sort of trying to even almost combine with them because they're similar mentality. It's the people in the traditional investment space who are nowhere near, they don't talk about fiat. They don't understand what's gone on with monetary systems globally. So they don't even get the macro. And then the Bitcoin people are trying to then, not just explain the macro, but then overlay this super complex infrastructure network on top of that. In terms of explaining why, it becomes very, very difficult and murky.
That's why I think it's interesting. We looked at the trend of the people. The brain drain out of macro into this is huge.
Well,
but the interesting one for me, because he is that communicator, is Jusko. Because Mark is actually really good at explaining to institutional people.
Mark is really good.
What it is.
Yeah.
Because Mark, yes, he's incredibly personal and he gets across very well.
Yes.
And
good guy.
He's a great guy, but he also understands how big a macro opportunity it was. It kind of was like, okay, this is it. He shifted his entire business to this.
And
he can communicate, hopefully, with at least some of the institutional guys to get them to understand.
Yeah, but you need 1,000
of course
of them, and I think and I actually think it's a very small group who have switched over.
Dan Moorhead was the first of all the people I knew. There was a bunch of guys, Chad and Emil, who were GMI guys, and as well, ex-Goldman guys.
Yeah.
They were extremely early, maybe even earlier.
Oh yeah.
They were Bitcoin mining from their office because they got free electricity.
Yeah, they were there.
And then it started. Then Novo, I think, and then John Burbank was super interesting. Even Alan Howard's got a Bitcoin group.
But it's very
Jim
small.
Pallotta. I know, but what's interesting is these are really, really respected people.
Yeah, for sure. So the people in politics and the leadership, and I would say even the leadership of the top companies where a lot of capital resides in the traditional world, they don't know these people, and they're very far away, and they're not connected. And this is an opportunity for you, I think, to create a platform to reach out to the more traditional investment world, explaining to them what is going on and why it's important. And there aren't that many people who I think sit in the middle of all of that. You have a few people who are asking questions, but even there are a lot of VCs. Very good macro understanding, but it's not the same thing. So I think there's real need now And I think there's a lot of value there.
I think that makes total sense. So for you, look, it's a really big universe because it's not just Bitcoin, but your particular attraction right now, and knowing you, it will change over time as you discover new things, is you're saying, okay, the one bet that you can have is Bitcoin.
Yeah.
But what do you think of, therefore, these other parallel universes? They're all part of the same digitization of the world, which is why I wrote that big GMI article this month about it, about digitization of all assets, and therefore the value of everything is digital now. And this is the architecture for all of that. So what do you think about, how do you think about that world of Ethereum and all the gazillion other currencies, tokens? I mean, so we're trying to figure this all out, right?
I think there's tremendous value. I mean, I think if you're new to the space and you want to get involved, Wences, the Zappo.
Caceres,
I mean,
Great
he wrote
guy.
this piece 3-4 months ago that was brilliant. He says, put 1% of your net worth into Bitcoin. If it goes to zero, whatever. If not, I think he almost said at one point, this was a few years ago even, it was irresponsible not to have 1% of your portfolio in Bitcoin. And I think you should have a lot more, but that's a good way to begin. To think about it.
The other person that's also involved in this is Mark Hart. Mark's always a good thinker
Mark.
as well.
Yeah, and I listened to your interviews with Mark in 2017. He was right on.
Yeah.
Everyone creates, because it's so hard to define in one sentence, everyone says, well, Bitcoin is like this. It's like the rails for the world. Or Bitcoin is like gold and Litecoin is like silver. They're trying, we're still trying to define it, and I think there are lots of opportunities, but I don't think that, unless you're going to do a lot of work and you're going to be able to do as much work as, someone who spends their entire life on it. I don't think you go in and, just buy Bitcoin Gold or chain, or any of Monero. I mean, there are a lot of valid enterprises, but I think you can just stick to Bitcoin as an entry because, that's the innovation, the invention. These other things, but look, Ethereum is, again, I'm not the right guy to talk about this, but I mean, it's programmable.
Super interesting.
I mean, you could do lots of things. The second layer at the conference, I heard there was a guy talking about how there's the Lightning system, which increases the speed of transactions of Bitcoin, but also that you can build a settlement feature into the second layer above Bitcoin. Now, I'm not sure exactly what he meant, but I listened to the presentation and I listened to it again, and I took it to mean that, okay, well, Bitcoin has more flexibility than at least some of the naysayers. There are a lot of naysayers out there saying, oh, it's too slow, it's too clunky. Again, that's part of its strength, the solidity. And then as time goes on, it becomes more and more secure, and the price of securing that network goes up in value more and more. It's almost exponential, right?
Because it is exponential. It has been exponential all the way through.
That's right. And so I want to get back to the value thing for a second,
yes,
just because
I want to come back to
because
that
you
as well.
say, so what can this thing be worth? And it's now $200 billion market cap, but that's kind of small. It's kind of small if you just see what's been built. Like, it would cost more than $200 billion to build that, right? So you can start to think that, within 10 years, the Winklevoss $1 million or Draper's $250,000 in the next few years, it's not unreasonable. And so what is the bet? The bet is to buy and to do nothing else. That's it. Unless you're going to be involved in like a fund business, and you're going to be trading this and that. But I don't even think I think that's not really needed.
So you become the holder, in the classic.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
I know.
I can't believe I'm hearing this from you.
I know. I can't believe it myself because I wasn't here 6 months ago.
No, I know. I mean, you were interested, but you weren't.
I was interested, but when, as I said, it was only the price went down so much. that I thought, okay, now I can have some way to figure out my risk reward. But then I bought it 5,000, 6,000, 7,000, 8,000. I mean, if it can go to that number and I'm going to hold for 10 years, then, even here, you can buy, but you have to be, and look, everyone is saying, oh, well, but you have to be willing to risk for it to go to zero.
Not anymore.
Well, you see, and that I remember even reading Dan Moorhead, who was in the Wall Street Journal. It was either January 18 or December 17. And he said it's a new technology, but you have to be prepared that it could go to zero. And I thought, that always stuck in my head. And then as it kept going down, and then you see all the businesses forming and all the infrastructure building, and you do all the work, I don't think it can't go to zero. And he probably would say that now too. In fact, maybe there's some superior system that comes down the road, but this has a 10-year track record of proving that it's a bulletproof security truth machine, right? And so that's totally new. And what's that worth? Well, Draper and Winklevoss and those guys.
The other one I've been interested in,
Yeah.
I talked to you about it the other day, was I came across this guy, Plan B, on Twitter, this $100 trillion. And what he did was a stock flow model. Again, I couldn't understand any of his mathematics. Really clever.
Yeah.
I'm going to get him on Real Vision because
good.
I'll do it
Good.
anonymously. He's based in Amsterdam, don't know who the hell he is. But it's like everybody's been struggling with a valuation tool.
Yeah.
And this guy, an anonymous guy, middle of nowhere, just dumps this complex maths and go, okay, here's how gold works in a stock flow model, and here's silver because it's industrial, puts it on a linear regression and shows you that Bitcoin is operating on an exponential increasing level like gold. I'm like, holy shit, this is super clever, because it's even clever for valuing gold. He's kind of solved the valuation of gold problem in the whole equation without even thinking about it, just by solving the Bitcoin valuation.
That's a good point.
So from him, using the exponential log scale of where he's going, he's like, okay, the next halving, because of what that does for the number of coins.
Yes.
He goes, okay, the next halving's 100,000. And it's like, before you know it, this thing is worth $100 trillion. But get this, that's worth $100 trillion when the mining stops, i.e. they've mined all the Bitcoin. After that, what's it worth? Because then it's an entire system in itself. Because at $100 trillion, okay, you've got an entire...
Well, what's the total world money supply? People often
This is Mark Hart's
use it. No,
argument.
I think it's 80 trillion or something. Or
not
total
sure.
world wealth. I think people are trying to compare to those numbers. Look, I don't know that you can do that, but it seems to me that, money supply is just dollars or currency in the system. That's not that ingenious.
No.
So you can get to those crazy numbers, but I don't see, there's too much time that I think it will take. Let's say it takes 10 years. There's so many innovations and changes and things that'll happen in 10 years.
Yeah, that's not macro timeline. That's VC timeline.
I think you can, and there are lots of, I didn't talk about them, but there are lots of ways to value Bitcoin that are just internal to its own ecosystem like that, without taking it outside and saying, what's this invention worth in the history and scope of, the last 100 years or whatever it is. I think there are thousands and thousands of people doing work on this. That's the power of it. It's, normally you'd have, the 10 smart guys at 10 different brokerages or something doing interesting macroeconomic work. You literally have thousands of people, thinking about this all over the world. Amsterdam, you have this interesting company, BitPesa, doing payments in Africa, and that's a whole other, thing. And, there's so many applications. We haven't talked about this at all. And some of them are there now, and some of them aren't, and some make money, and some don't. But the scope, so now here you go. Now I say, oh, it's bigger than anything we've ever seen. And so the problem is you say things like that, and
But it's like describing the internet back in the 80s, right? It's very difficult to describe.
Well, so I had the thought, well, it wasn't my thought, I read it somewhere, that someone said, the internet was created and not create, it was, the uptake, the usage. And who would have thought that, the number one thing that the internet is used for is watching cat videos and streaming video. And he said, well, wouldn't it be interesting if the internet was just sort of the base for allowing the Bitcoin framework to exist? That in the end, the function of the internet will have been to sustain and maintain the Bitcoin world, the invention of this new system. And so that maybe, years from now we'll be saying, well, that's of course why the internet was invented. Or not invented, that was the use case for the internet, was Bitcoin, not,
Everything
streaming.
else is peripheral.
Yeah, selling stuff online, like, oh my gosh, we could have figured that out, right? Amazon, right? Maybe, and I think, it's not a crazy argument.
So I'm worried about the global economy, and you and I have talked about it as well.
Yeah.
I don't know where you stand currently on this. But one of my outputs from this is just at a very simple level, the most simple macro level is we go from the US having to get rates to zero, let's say.
Okay.
We have the ECB then having to do something more extreme, and we have the BOJ then having to go more extreme again, right? That's the typical pattern. So we end up with extraordinary world, whatever that is, MMT plus whatever,
Okay.
whatever it looks like. So you start to think, well, obviously Bitcoin and gold, both of them look like great options. They're
Yeah.
just options on something. I think Bitcoin has the potential to be the larger option for the reasons we say, because it's an option into, as I said, something entirely different.
But it's a different bet than gold.
Yes,
It's a different
completely
bet.
different bet.
Yeah.
And so that thesis for you holds up as well from a macro perspective, that if things get ugly and there's more central bank largesse, then it's got to be a net beneficiary into Bitcoin.
Yeah, but I mean,
I know it's not
think
your
Bitcoin,
reasoning.
No, I think Bitcoin does its thing on its own.
Yeah.
Meaning that people will start to realize what I am realizing, what all the people in this space who are really committed, what they see. And so I think it's almost on its own. Yeah, it's helpful if rates go down. Gold will respond because, I think gold is interesting now because, most of the world just owns equities, and at least in America, but also in other places, lots of equity holdings. And if equities go down, there's no hedge because the bonds can't really go much below zero. We've seen they can, but that's not a great hedge. If you're concerned about, if you see the drop, and for me, the most important thing going on now, macro, is this massive drop in prices. It was the ISM price component, and in the last 4 or 5 months, it's just gone straight down. I sent you that chart.
Yeah.
And that's a very scary chart. And it shows that, okay, now Fed is nowhere near their target, but everyone has misevaluated the degree of price compression. And the Fed knew it 6 months ago. We never got close to any target. So, that's the challenge, is how do you get to a place where you stop deflating? And, you have the web, the Amazon effect and all of that, which is talked about all the time. I mean, that's real. I think that's real. You have a home advisor thing. I needed a new air conditioning unit in the first floor of my house. And my guy, who I've had for 20 years, quoted me a price. I thought, that's crazy. I mean, that's nuts. I go onto the web, Home Advisor, the air conditioning guys who are in my area. I said the problem. Within 10 minutes, I got a call back. A guy gave me a price that was 15% lower. I just went back to my normal guy. I'm like, look, that's the price. And he basically said, fine. So, oh, you're a great client, et cetera. So things like, and I wasn't aware of this. I just said, the guy's ripping me off. I know it. Even if a guy like me is doing that, right, everyone else is. And so that pressure, and certainly in Asia, and how adept and facile they are. And so that pressure just continues. And so the issue really is, how much can you pump in, right? You're saying MMT or more rate cuts or whatever it is. And so what happens is gold does become the hedge for the traditional world. because as the rates drop, it will go up. It is very sensitive to liquidity, changes in liquidity from the main central banks. And it has a lot of other things that it responds to as well. And I think Bitcoin is its own thing. It'll do well in that, but it'll do well if that doesn't happen as well. So
So it's going up.
I think so. I think it's just about about having the time and patience, and and just having the allocation, and not being too cute about it.
Our rate's going to zero.
Well, I think they're going all the way back down. Maybe
Right.
I don't know if it's zero or whatever it is, but
you know what I mean.
at the round table in California, we had our favorite trade, and I said my favorite trade was the 2-year note.
Yeah.
And it's pretty much dropped, and I think Stan said he thinks he could see it down to 50 basis points.
That's right.
I mean, you don't have to listen to me about that. I mean, I think that's
Stan's telling us. He's long. He's long. People like him and Alan Howe, they're all long Eurodollars, 2 years.
Well, and also, I mean, I think it was about a month ago, Paul Tudor Jones came out and said his favorite bet for the next 2 years is gold. That was, I don't know if you remember that. And And then it rallied 10%, and it's now at a 6-year high. I don't recall, Paul, I don't know him personally, but I followed him, and I don't recall him very often, at least, having a 2-year view, being that definitive, and saying one thing, this is for the next 2 years. So, of course, I can come up with my own reasons, and he has his own reasons, but I kind of think the two are linked in a way. They're linked. I think you'll have more upside in terms on the gold, because I don't think the 2 years are going below zero.
I do.
Okay.
It is everywhere else.
But they
right?
could. No,
they are everywhere else.
Right. They certainly could. And again, so recession, you can still have 1% GDP, but you could have, a 1% CPI will feel like a recession. A 0 CPI will feel like a recession. You still could have some growth. And I hate being so cataclysmic also about it, because it can happen over a long period of time. It could be over the next 2 years, right? The one thing that I think is a little spanner in the works of that is that I think Trump is very aggressive. I think that the market probably has to be near its highs going into the election next year. So you might get a very severe dip now, like you had in last December, and then a panic response. I don't think Trump is going to let it, and he could do lots of things. There are lots of levers that you can pull to push that off. Can we have an 2008 collapse? It just seems a little less likely, because we're so aware of that. December showed that, look, we'd been talking about this in March. March of 18. China was slowing. They still have a big corporate debt problem. There's still a huge overhang. There are problems there now. The two-year rate of change of LIBOR, which was a phenomenal indicator. Anyone watching this should go back to your work and look at that indicator. You combine those two things, and remember, we were at we were at a restaurant here in the city, and we hammered this out in March and April, and then you throw QT on it, and all of a sudden in December, boom. But what normally would have led to more of a wipeout, didn't, because there's so much intervention now in the traditional markets. I think that's why they're so boring compared to what's going on in crypto, because things are known. It used to be, it was a handful of guys looking at Fed policy in the late 80s and 90s, and now it's thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, and there's nothing there. There's no
edge.
Yeah, you can be long the 2-year, and you can hold it. And if it's moving up and down month to month, you can't manage your P&L based on that. You have to hold it. I think it's a good view. But for the moment, until those 2 years get down to 50 bips Stan's level, or 1%, I think the equity can still hang in there. So we don't go into, it goes down, and especially into the election, I don't think we can go into that cataclysmic, it's all over. Let's get rid of the fiat monetary money system, and it's too much.
Yeah.
And these things, as you know, macro always takes longer
Than
to
you
happen
ever you imagine.
than you imagine.
To get the right answer
Yeah.
is actually not that difficult. To get the time of these bigger events, really hard.
Yeah, but I mean, look, you've done a good job, and I think that there are people out there who do it and do it well. And look, you've been right on this 2-year call,
Yeah.
and I don't think you suffered that much. You've been right on like the moments, and then you got back into gold. Also, I think
Yeah.
at the right time.
Yeah.
And now I think you can have that position
Yeah, I think
until
you can hold
Tudor,
that.
until Paul comes out and says, "Okay, I'm done with it," or maybe before then.
Always before, yeah.
Before then, but I don't have as dramatic a view because I mean, look, we would have if in the '90s talking about Japan, we all thought, it was going to blow up, and I guess it has blown up, but it's taken. But have they felt it? Have we felt it? I mean,
No.
it's still. It's
No.
still this morass of, and they have companies there that are doing great things, and real estate is still relatively,
Yeah.
expensive. And so, the '08 events, or I'll call 97, 98, Asia, and then those macro crisis events, they're just, we already all made our money on that. Like, we did that. Like,
Well, you're saying it's the
is-
opposite. We've got the upside is the Bitcoin. That's the
Right, well-
complete regime change, much like '98 in Asia was. It was complete.
Yeah, right. I think it's
it's an opposite,
No, but
it's
it's
an
a
upside.
constant. No, it's a constant.
Does this mean that macro guys have to become optimistic?
No, I actually
Optimistic?
I,
That'd be
I-
extraordinary.
I think that they can shoehorn themselves into this and look, I think within 5 to 8 years, every single hedge fund will be trading
Oh, yeah,
crypto.
yeah.
I mean, in some form, because what's going to happen is that there is going to be an entire system that hasn't been built yet that is going to grow up around it. For instance, the lending market. It's just started.
Custody.
There's going to be custody. There's going to be repo. There's going to be people who own Bitcoin. And one thought, it'd be interesting to know what you think about this, but I'm starting to have this feeling that Bitcoin might actually not be the thing that gets spent and used, and that it might be something
Totally
else.
agree.
Because everyone in this space, I mean, May 22nd is Bitcoin Pizza Day, right? Everyone knows that guy spent 10,000 Bitcoin on 2 slices, right? And then you have Winklevoss also talking about how he paid for his galactic Branson flight with Bitcoin. And then at the conference just now, a guy said how he paid thousands of Bitcoin for a cup of coffee in the early days. So everyone who's bought or who owns, is hearing these, remembers these stories. It's like almost a meme, like, oh,
Never sell.
Right, you were the
Never
guy, who blew 1,000 Bitcoin on that. So, and I think that's okay. And that also contributes to the robustness and strength, right?
It depends what layers you build on
system.
top and the stuff around it.
Right, but I think that's all, and I don't just mean like the normal financial architecture, the lending and repo, and the collateralization of Bitcoin, using it as collateral to be able to buy other things. I think that's coming also. So I don't know how it'll work. I mean, maybe it is just Satoshis that end up getting transferred back and forth. Or maybe it is Litecoin, or maybe it is some, thing
Something
that
else, yeah.
hasn't come around yet. Anyway, I tell everybody who's under 30, if they're looking about something to do or they're interested, what
Go
should I
into
do?
this.
Do I go to a macro hedge fund? Probably not, unless you're going to be doing something interesting like this.
Brilliant. I mean, look,
Yeah.
it was a really good tour around some really big concepts, some good ideas,
Yeah.
a bit of old-fashioned macro, the whole thing as ever.
This is what we do every
is
week
what-
anyway. So, I just came in here to,
do
see you face to face.
Perfect.
So,
Well, good to see you, and
My
we'll get
pleasure.
you back
Anytime.
when Bitcoin's at 100,000 next.
And gold at 5,000.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, that was one hell of a conversation. Dan is a really old school macro guy. And, he's about currency crisis and, current account imbalances and this kind of stuff. When Dan comes in almost breathless with excitement about Bitcoin and how big the entire ecosystem that's developing, in terms that I've never heard him talk before, and I've actually not heard many people speak before, I pay attention. This is something truly extraordinary. And to hear Dan come at it like this, that it's like dwarfs all the other opportunities, I think is very important. But it also works with the recession narrative that we've talked about. Dan kindly talked to us about gold and how he sees that fitting in, and also his 2-year bond trade, which is the same trade that I have put on a while ago, and I brought many people on Real Vision through from October last year, which was the Eurodollar trade. So really interesting to see how all of these things come together and how they really could offer us not only a future of making money over a recession cycle, but maybe the future on the other side of it too.
So I hope that video helped you think about investing, finance, trading in a slightly different way, hopefully opened your world up a little bit, and got you thinking about how to make better decisions in the future. And if that's something you want to help your customers do as well, you could consider gifting them Real Vision subscriptions. It could help them be more confident, maybe make some more trades, or just understand the financial world in a clearer and maybe unconventional sense. Actually, IG Group did just that. They gifted 20,000 of their customers with Real Vision subscriptions to maybe encourage them to trade a little more, invest a little more, and just be smarter when it comes to their money and what's going on in the financial world around them. If that's something you want to help out your customers with, you can email us, enterprise@realvision.com. We'll hook you up.